Yes. I've enjoyed it.
You were so polite.
I give Phil grief. Good morning, and welcome to the San Francisco Planning Commission and Recreation and Park Commission special hearing for Thursday, November 10th, 2016. I'd like to remind members of the public that the Commission does not tolerate any disruption or outbursts of any kind. Please silence your mobile devices that may sound off during these proceedings. And when speaking before the commissions, if you care to, do state your name for the record. I'd like to take roll at this time. Commission President Fong.
Here.
Commission Vice President Richards.
Here.
Commissioner Koppel.
Here.
And Commissioner Moore.
Here.
We do expect Commissioners Hillis, Johnson, and Melgar to arrive shortly.
And now for the Recreation and Park Commission, Commissioner Buell.
Here.
Commissioner Lowe.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
And Commissioner Harrison.
Here.
Both Commissioner Bonilla and McDonald do have excused absences.
Thank you, Commissioners. Under your special calendar, please note that the joint commissions will hold one public hearing for the public to provide testimony on all of the items listed below. Following the public hearing, the Recreation and Park Commission will act jointly with the Planning Commission to consider raising the cumulative shadow limit for Gene Friend Recreation Center and adopting findings under the California Environmental Quality Act, and the Recreation and Park Commission will consider making a recommendation to the Planning Commission regarding the possible adverse impact of shadow on Gene Friend Recreation Center. Following action on those items, the Recreation and Park Commission will adjourn, and the Planning Commission will remain in session and separately consider action on all other entitlements. Item 1A, B, C, and D for case numbers 2013.1773K and X at 345 6th Street. Discussion and possible joint action by the Planning Commission and Recreation and Park Commission to raise the cumulative shadow for Gene Friend Park. Discussion and possible action by the Recreation and Park Commission to adopt a resolution to recommend to the Planning Commission that the new shadow cast by the proposed project at 345 6th Street will not have a significant adverse impact on the use of Gene Friend Recreation Center. And the Planning Commission will consider adoption of findings as well as a large project authorization.
Director Ram.
Thank you. Commissioners, just good morning. John Ram, Planning Department. I wanted to reintroduce you to a former planner who has returned to the Planning Department after many years away. Daniel Sarai is an urban planning professional with 17 years of experience in North America and the Middle East. Early in his career, Daniel worked in redevelopment planning in Scottsdale, Arizona, and on the Willamette River in Portland. And he previously had spent 5 years with the Planning Department doing current planning with the department. Then went on to Vancouver, where he worked for both the city and the University of British Columbia. And then moved on to become an urban planner in Qatar in the Middle East. Worked in the Lusail City Planning Team in Doha and a number of efforts there. He also sat on the Architectural Design Committee responsible for approvals on all major projects there. He holds a Master's of Environmental Planning from Arizona State, Bachelor of Arts in Urban Studies from Concordia, and a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from the University of Ottawa. And we welcome him back after a many-year absence to the department.
Thanks for that introduction, John. Appreciate that.
Pleasure.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Dan Sirwa from the Planning Department staff. I'm joined by Jordan Harris from the Recreation and Park Department, as well as Erica Jackson, our Shadow Specialist at the Planning Department. The project before you is a request for a large project authorization for a new mixed-use building at 345 6th Street. This project will cast shadow on the Gene Friend Recreation Center. Since Gene Friend Recreation Center possesses a shadow budget, the two commissions must take joint action to, one, increase the park's shadow budget, and two, adopt the motion that additional shadow caused by the project would not be adverse to the Gene Friend Recreation Center. Additional information on the shadow and its impacts will be provided by Jordan Harrison. Please note that the materials passed out to you today include amendments to the Recreation and Park and Planning Commission resolutions so that they are talking to each other, that we're coordinating the findings. Also included in this packet is the final shadow memo that makes corrections to the project descriptions and some report language. The shadow study findings remain the same. The proposed project includes the demolition of the existing single-story parking garage structure and the construction of a 9-story, 85-foot tall residential building with 102 SRO dwelling units. There's approximately 1,700 square feet of ground floor commercial space. There's 102 Class 1 bicycle spaces and 7 Class 2 bicycle spaces. Under the large project authorization, the proposal is seeking exceptions to the planning code requirements for rear yard under Section 134, permitted obstructions over streets under Section 136, and dwelling unit exposure under Section 140. The project has elected the on-site affordable housing alternative identified in Planning Code Section 415.6 and 419.3. The project contains 102 SRO dwelling units, and the sponsor will fulfill the requirements for providing the 14 affordable units on site, which will be available for rent. As part of the project, the project sponsor has entered into a Costa-Hawkins agreements with the city. In compliance with Ordinance Number 7015, the Entertainment Commission held a hearing for this project on November 1st, 2016, and proposed conditions of approvals for the project. The Entertainment Commission requests that the Commission adopt those conditions, which have been reviewed and accepted by the project sponsor. Those conditions are in the materials passed out to you today. The department has received 2 letters in opposition to the project and 1 letter supporting the project signed by United Playas, the West Bay Filipino Center, the Veterans Equity Center, and the Filipino American Development Foundation. After studying all the aspects of the project, the department recommends approvals with conditions. Specifically, the project is in general conformance with the planning code. The project is consistent with the objectives and policies of the general plan. The project is located in a zoning district where residential and ground floor commercial uses are principally permitted and encouraged. The project produces a new mixed-use development with 102 SRO dwelling units and ground floor retail. The project is consistent with consistent with and respects the existing neighborhood character and provides an appropriate massing and scale for the large parcel. The project will fully utilize Eastern Neighborhood Area Plan controls and will pay the appropriate impact fees. This concludes my presentation, and I'll be available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, opening up to public comment. I'm sorry, is there project sponsor, Jonas? Yes, project sponsor.
We also need to hear, I believe, from Rec Park staff.
Okay, thank you.
Is there not a presentation here? Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jordan Harrison. I'm with the Recreation and Park Department. With my presentation, I'll walk through the shadow impacts from 345 6th Street onto the Jean Fran Recreation Center property. As you're aware, with the voter-approved sunlight ordinance, Section 295 requires specific findings related to shadow on rec park properties. Memoranda adopted jointly by these 2 commissions provide guidance on how to assess that shadow. And as a park that is smaller than 2 acres with an existing shadow greater than 20% of the year, Jean Fran has an annual limit of 0%. This map provides... Do you have the presentation in front of you? Or?
No.
Okay, I'll look this way then. This map provides the location of the project relative to 2 rec and park properties, Jean Fran, which is formerly the Soma Rec Center, and Victoria Manalo Draves Park. The shadow analysis determined that there would be no project shadow on VMD because the buildings in between the project and VMD intercept project shadow. So my presentation will focus only on Jean Fran. So here is the layout of the Jean Fran property. The park features a basketball court, rec center, grassy area, and playground. And this very hard to read slide is an illustration of the preliminary park layout that the department is working on. We're in the process of redesigning the Jean Friend property. This layout was presented to the Civic Design Review Committee and the Eastern Neighborhood CAC in December of 2015. This is not an adopted concept plan, and it's being provided to you only for informational purposes. The preliminary design is still in development. We are currently working on a feasibility study, and features of the layout may shift. As shown here, you can see that the proposal moves the rec center building forward to the corner of 6th and Folsom Streets, to activate that corner. So I'll now present shadow images for the existing and proposed park layout that illustrate the shade crossing the property. So this image is the largest project shadow. It would occur on March 8th and October 4th around 8 to 10 in the morning. The greatest shadow impacts occur in the mornings, in the early spring and fall. And this animation illustrates the shadow crossing the park property. And as you can see, it leaves the property just before 9. It shades the entry areas, grassy area, and playground, portions of the playground. So this animation, for informational purposes, is the proposed park layout that I mentioned is subject to change, but as you can see, the building being moved forward to the corner of Folsom and 6th intercepts some of the project shadow. So this table provides a summary of the shadow impacts onto the park property. The shadows occur in the mornings, in the spring and fall, and parts of the winter. On days with new shadow, the range is from just over 4 minutes to just under 30 minutes. The shadows fall on the southwest corner of the property where the grassy area, playground, and pathways are currently located. And the project leaves the property before 9 a.m., which is when the property currently opens. The 1989 memo provides guidance on how to assess shadows for this park, and ACL of 0% annual cumulative limit of 0% was established for Jean Friend. The property would introduce an additional 0.39% of new square foot hours of shadow annually, which would increase the shadow load for the park to 47.66% for the year. For this reason, the joint action by the commissions is necessary. So in addition, the commission likes to consider cumulative projects within the vicinity of the park. So this map illustrates other projects in the vicinity that have the potential to shade Jean Friend. One of the properties, which is immediately adjacent to the subject property, which is 363, the subject property is in yellow there. 363 was approved by this commission last fall, and the one just south of that, 988 Harrison, wouldn't reach Jean Friend. This hard-to-read table provides you the numeric summary of the shadow impacts based on preliminary analysis of those projects I illustrated in that last map. These are all preliminary assessments, and the design of these buildings is still underway, so these could change. But we would like to provide you this information as best that we have right now. Cumulatively, these projects could increase the shadow load on Jean Friend by 1.3%. But as I mentioned, these are preliminary designs. The number would probably be lower because those shadows may intercept one another. But it's too early to say right now. So finally, the sponsor will speak to this more, but to summarize community outreach and benefits for the project, the sponsor facilitated 11 meetings for local stakeholder groups, and letters of support and opposition were received by the departments and included in your packets. As Dan Sirois explained, the project would provide 14 affordable units, as well as pay the required impact fees and make streetscape improvements. So this concludes my presentation. I'm available along with planning staff for any questions you may have.
Okay, can you pass that around so we could see what you were referring to?
Which one?
What you just held in your hand, your presentation?
My presentation?
Please.
I have
It's
a
not.
copy.
It's not in. I'm having a hard time following. Maybe in the future we could get a copy of the presentations. Thank you.
Okay, project sponsor, please.
morning, Commissioners. Joseph Thompson of Thompson Law Firm. On behalf of project sponsor, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present this project. I'd like to preface our presentation by extending our gratitude to the Planning Department and various neighborhood organizations that have helped refine our vision through continuous dialogue over the course of 2 years. This project cohesively reflects their design and logistical recommendations, resulting in practical housing replete with an expansive commercial space that will activate this corridor and add to our market and affordable housing stock. More so, the proposed building will be horizontally aligned with slated and approved projects on the north side of 6th between Folsom and Harrison Street. Your approval will allow us to further immerse ourselves in a community that we've called home for the past decade. Reza of SIA Consulting will now provide a summary of the project at 3456 Street. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Reza Kushnabisani, SIA Consulting. Also, I would like to thank you for taking the time to hearing our case. I would like to make it quick, as they say. I'm going to point out why this project, we feel that it fits within the neighborhood properly, and it helps the street experience, and how does it fit into the block. If I may have the overhead. This building is 345 6th Street, as we are proposing. Next door is the project that was approved last year. It's also a nine-story building with ground floor commercial. Yeah. And you see the rest of the block, as we go down Shipley Street. So the way that the building is designed. Sorry. So the way that the building is designed is that we have matched the neighbor's rear yard. At this point, there is no open space. There's no pattern of mid-block open space due to the building that is sitting on both our lot and the neighboring lot. And what we're proposing is, just like the neighbor's property, as you guys approved last year, we're proposing a 25-foot setback to their property line, totaling to 50 feet, which creates an open space that will benefit the rest of the homes, down the block. In addition, on the ground floor, if I may, yeah, thank you. Also, to give you orientation, we have 6th Street on one side, and this is Shipley going down the street. So again, we have carefully designed, this layout so that we have a generous commercial space with approximately 19-foot ceiling, which makes a great inviting commercial space that is non-existent at this point. And as we go down Shipley Street, which we get into more residential block face, we have provided the residential entrance and 4 residential units that are at the back of the sidewalks. So one thing that I wanted to point out about this project and some of the concerns that, or I may say the only concern that we have heard face-to-face, with the neighborhood, was that during these meetings that we held at the site, the neighbors came and they thought that this was a group housing with 1 kitchen in every level and more of a transient housing, and it made everybody nervous. So we explained to them that this is in fact a studio units. They are rentals, and they have the kitchen in the units. They have high ceilings, by virtue of the concrete construction that we are proposing, which allows for a 7-inch thickness of the floors. At ground floor, we are providing 8 foot 11 inches of ceiling height, which is more generous than most of the units that you see in town at 8 feet or even less at some areas. And on the upper floors, we have 8 foot 8 ceiling. So by virtue of the ceiling height and the fenestration, if you look at the elevations, we feel that, there's a lot of volume and there's a lot of light coming into these units, and by far, they're not a cramped dark units. This is a building that, we are hoping to keep in our family, for a very long time. Our office is a few blocks from there, and it's personal to us. We manage the units ourselves, and we design the projects, engineer the projects, and we are through, we manage the construction. So we are proud of that. We want to make sure that, the residents, are comfortable in the units, and we are not jamming units into this building. In addition, the other aspect of this building that is rather abnormal to most of the projects in this town is in 9 floors of occupancy, we have 6 levels of decks. So the occupants, would have a choice to, they don't have to go all the way to the 9th floor roof deck to be able to get fresh air and light. We are providing various decks, whether private or common, for the enjoyment of the tenants, and we feel that it's going to be a good building, and it's going to be comfortable to live in. In addition, one thing that I would like you guys to also look at, we added an alternate floor plan for the ground floor. On the 8th floor, we lost 1 unit as a result of putting a community room on the 8th floor. We were hoping to see whether it would be acceptable to the commissioners if we were to reduce our ground floor footprint and provide a rear yard at grade, somewhat such as the adjacent building has, and to be able to provide a generous ground floor community room, which could, upper floor community room, was about 12 feet wide. Here we could provide 25 by 25 or even larger, at the ground floor, opening into a ground floor garden. That concludes my presentation. I have Mr. Brad Terrell that did a great job with the facade. He's going to talk about the architecture of the exterior of the building, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Brad Terrell. I'm the design lead with the team. I'm really pleased to introduce the project and to draw a little closer to the design that's been in development for more than 3 years. Can I have the overhead, please? There you go. From a distance, the building is composed as a simple cubic volume atop a glass podium at 6th Street. Here. Complementing this volume is a 4-story expression that's organized with garden units, projecting bays, and terraces fronting onto the Shipley Street. This is important to note given the orientation of the building. It fronts a very busy primary street and then also fronts a very intimate secondary alley. Then this is something we've taken into account both in the planning of the ground floor plan and as much as the elevation can express. Along this Shipley alleyway, the street wall is set back from the property line to afford a more space at the sidewalk. And this was something that we felt was important to both make the street more inviting and to align with some of our adjacent context that we have there. Looking closer at the primary massing, again at the corner, the volume is further differentiated by the expressed horizontal structure that we have. As Russa mentioned, these bands of horizontal structure are further expressed by alternating bands of fenestration, and that fenestration is composed of both solid and void with fiber cement panels and glazing floor to ceiling, stretching from slab to slab. This pattern of solid and void is accentuated by these projecting bays, these projecting slab edges rather, that provide shadows and further invigorate the elevation with direction, be it in the morning or the afternoon, where the shadows and light are coming from. So, with that said, we've invested a good bit of interest and time into the materials and the relief on the building, and I feel like that's something that we want to call attention to in the elevation there. So, thank you.
Okay, that is it from project sponsor. Opening it up to public comment.
Good morning, Commissioners. President Ronnie Fong, good morning to the new commissioners. Congratulations. My name is Rudy Corpus. I'm the Executive Director of a violence prevention program called United Players that's housed in the South of Market. I'm also a resident of South of Market, born and raised. I'm here to support the project. I'm here because we have met with some of the developers and, made agreements upon what would be best for the community, for our organizations, and also what's best for the community. It's very rewarding when you can meet developers in the community that wants to meet with the community and that wants to build with the community. I don't think they're just like developers that just came in, build something, make some money, and get on. They're here also as a community partner, and to me that's more important than anything that we can get, is building a relationship. Our motto is, it takes the hood to say the hood. And now they're in the community with us, and they've been in the community with us. It's time that we start building these bridges, not these walls, in particular in the district that we're in District 6, South of Market. So I'm here to support these guys in full and say let's move forward with the project, and thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Bernadette C. I'm the Executive Director of the Filipino American Development Foundation and also the project sponsor for Soma Pilipinas, the Filipino Cultural Heritage District. So the project sponsor has offered to support our community. One of the things that we are requesting from the project is also to provide affordable commercial space. As we build out our Filipino small business district in South of Market, it's really imperative that we try to retain a lot of our businesses that are already here. We know that there's a Cecilia's In and Out that's been here for 15 years, and she has, their family is about to be displaced. And so the project sponsor has offered to provide below market rate in its commercial space. So for that, we're supporting the project. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Luisa Antonio, and I'm the Executive Director of the Veterans Equity Center. I just want to echo Bernadette Tsai's comments about the developers' support for our community. As a worker in the South of Market for the last 25 years and have been working with a lot of Filipino families, what we have seen is small businesses that are providing, the services for the Filipino families have gone. And there's an Asian market, in fact, on Mission Street that is getting displaced. And one of the things that we appreciate about the developer is coming to our community and making a commitment to help us preserve the small businesses and support for BMR office space, commercial space for the small businesses. And it is really important that we have it as we are working on making sure that we have a thriving Filipino community in the South of Market. It's important to have Filipino businesses that is serving the community. Thank you.
Okay, any additional public comment?
Overhead, please. Sue Hester, I'm not going to speak on shadows, I'm going to speak on architecture. This is a map that the planning department gives out when they have PPAs to this site. This site has it. And it shows this site is fill. Fill. This is the map that the planning department gives out on all PPAs. I didn't understand the qualifications of the person who spoke as the designer. Is he an engineer? What kind of an engineer? What kind of analysis was done of the structure of this building in light of the soils that they're on? I've been dealing with projects back to the 90s on soft soils in this area of South Amargan. There was enormous disruption in Loma Prieta. We now are having hearings on soils in South Amarga at the Board of Supervisors downtown. What qualifications underlie the plans engineering-wise, because engineering plans affect the architecture. They have to have real implications for the structural part of the plan. So I have separate questions on the shadows, but I'm very concerned about the soils. So I refer to you to the map that is the Planning Department's map. It's State of California Seismic Hazard Zone official map, November 17th, 2000. It's a real map. And it was given to this developer when they did a PPA. So please credentialize your plans and the person who spoke. Thank you.
Tom Gilberti, on shadows, is it possible to do a tiered setback upper levels? I mean, minimal loss of apartments, of housing, rooms, but they may add a little bit more slant, less shadow. I like a tiered building much better than a box. Next issue, rooftop garden. I came here today to speak to combined commissions, and if anything's above 9 stories, a rooftop garden gets to be a windy effect. But a rooftop garden is one way for people that live in a building to meet each other in a non-commercial space. They're not being sold. And I'm sorry I don't know all the facts here. Do they have a rooftop garden here planned? Those are the only 2 issues that I am concerned about. Again, non-shadow, the tiered upper levels, setback, that can work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners, and welcome to the new members. My name is Jane Weil, and this is
Anuji.
And we are the District 6 representatives to PROZAC, the Park and Rec Citizens Advisory Commission. In general, we are supportive of this project. I think it adds needed housing, which we all know. I would echo the person who spoke before me. We are concerned in general about shadowing any of our parks. We all know about the city ordinance that forbids shadowing of the parks. We have so little open space as it is in our district that the precious bit that we have, we would like to preserve the sunlight. So if there is any way in a planning or architectural sense that could be avoided, we would like to have that considered. We would also like to see if there's a way that the green space that is being suggested would be able to be open to the public. We have popos all over our district. Most of them are unusable. They're not accessible to the public, even though they have a small sign that says that they are. And once again, to reiterate, there is so little open space in our district that we would like to see if that can be accessible to everyone. The last question we have is the distinction at planning between an SRO and a studio. So we heard that each unit would have a kitchen. But does each unit have a bathroom, or are they shared bathrooms? And that would make a difference in terms of family usage of the units, and we would just like to have that clarified. So as the last thing I would like to make is a sort of addition to that, we live in both Soma and the Tenderloin, and our neighborhood is becoming denser by the day. There are over 10,000 new units either in the pipeline or already opened in our immediate neighborhood in the sort of mid-market, central market district. And there is so little open space for the families that are being built for. So on the one hand, to Park and Rec, we really thank you for approving the proposed acquisition on 11th Street. We are very excited about that, and that would be really an addition for us. But our concern is it won't be available to us until at the least 2024, which doesn't do a single thing for all of the 10,000 new units and the rest of the people that live there. So we would like to ask you to reconsider this second proposed acquisition in the neighborhood. Park and Rec has already done all the research for it. Prozac actually passed resolutions supporting both of them. We don't see this as an either-or proposition. We'd like to have you reconsider acquiring both. Thank you all very much.
Okay, is there any additional public comment? Okay, not seeing any public comment is closed, and opening up to both commissioners. Commissioner Moore.
Speaking in the context of our joint discussion, I want to just briefly say that I find the building to be interesting in response to the challenges the site poses. Opening up to a broader mid-block open space is a very good idea. Stepping the building is a very good idea because it will indeed de-emphasize an impact on a smaller residential community to the northwest. But I have one question and one I would like to explore in front of you together with Mr. Sucre, because I had to place a call to the planning department with respect to one particular aspect of the project where I don't quite think we are meeting the general requirement that this commission upholds when it comes to ground floor units. Mr. Sucre, would you mind engaging with me in a conversation? Typically, when it comes to alleys anywhere, be that on Stevenson, be that in Hayes Valley, we have a strong, well-developed set of residential guidelines which deals with a privacy issue for units which you enter off an alley into the unit. And coming in level is just not assuring the privacy we're looking for, because you would have to have your shades drawn all day in order to have privacy. We're not living in Holland, where everybody just doesn't look into each other's units, and curtains and shades are not the rule. Here it is, and because we have studio units, which are well-sized, yet there are only studios, we do not have much space to distinguish between the more private parts of our, am I saying this right? Between the private zones in our units versus other rooms which are further back. These units are compliant units relative to bedroom exposures. They are built the right way. However, they need to be raised 3 feet above the sidewalk in order to have the privacy we're looking for. And I placed a call, and I think, Mr. Sucre, if you want to pick up where I'm leaving off here, perhaps you could fill us in.
Correct. Rich Sucre, department staff. So Commissioner Moore is referring to our ground floor residential design guidelines. And typically, we like to have dwelling units along the public rights-of-way to help activate the streets. And we often look at a couple of different design considerations. When looking at that, we look at the overall benefits of the project, the conditions of the street, the kind of specifics of the design and the overall development. The raising and the introduction of stoops is a pretty common method that we will look at. And in this instance, we had the architect had originally proposed a kind of forecourt, kind of like private entryway into that provided a buffer to the street and then to the unit, which we didn't find very favorable considering the kind of shade that it would cast on the street. And given the constraints of the overall height, it wasn't, we found the current design acceptable relative to that. However, Commissioner Moore is correct in the sense that this isn't typical of our ground floor residential design guidelines. So,
I want to take it away, and you can look at the pictures of a very well-developed document done in 2011 by the department, very much guidance to rules we have enforced pretty much all along, particularly with those commissioners, including the more recent ones throughout the city, as we are starting to discover the importance of our alleys as a new neighborhood street. I believe that this project would greatly fail by not realizing the step up, but what it would require is adjusting the overall volumetric parts of the lower piece and the upper piece by potentially dropping a floor. I am not as much concerned about the unit yield as I'm interested in the overall properly functioning of those units which we're bringing to market. There is not, for me, a delta between one or the other. Numerically, one is better. We need to bring consistency to the way we are now developing residential on alleys, which never did exist before, and the department's guidelines are very persuasive. And I'm sending out the pictures here to do it correctly, which means let's lift the ground floor, but in order to stay with the height limit, we may have to drop an additional floor, which would help us with potentially lessening any residual impact we have on parks, which would meet the larger objective of protecting our parks when it comes to the public interest, which in this particular neighborhood is exasperated by the fact that some of the newer parks only will come in 2024, as the group just said. So that nobody loses. I think the developers still have a good building, and I strongly support it, yet there needs to be a couple of adjustments in order to fly. That is my comment. Thank you.
Commissioner Lowe.
Jordan, can you describe to us what the proposed redevelopment is of Gene Friend Rec Center as it relates to the shadow that's being cast on the southwest corner? What you mentioned that you're bringing the building closer to Folsom Street, but what's the intended use there?
So the objectives of the redesign process were to increase the amount of basketball space on the interior of the building and retain the existing programming, which is a exercise room, basketball, and multipurpose rooms. The new building will be 2 stories, so we'll be achieving those goals by moving some of the uses upstairs. And we're currently, in terms of moving it forward, the purpose of that was to create an activation, to improve the activation of that corner. Having it recessed kind of makes it a little less activity.
So will that be outdoor space or indoor space?
Indoor space. Okay. So the building slides forward.
So the proposed shadow would just hit the building, not actually outdoor space or outdoor basketball courts?
Right. So moving the building forward
under the proposed redevelopment plan.
Sorry, can you repeat your
question?
Under
the proposed redevelopment plan, the shadow would hit a building versus active outdoor space.
Yes, most of the shadow would. Do you have any further questions about that?
No.
Okay.
Commissioner Harrison. That you're not Hillis? Who's Harris? Who's Hillis? Say,
I'm Hillis.
Oh, sorry.
Dennis is Hillis.
I was misadvised.
My fault. Commissioner Richards.
Thank you. So if staff, you may, one more time, please, on the shadow, the park plan. And maybe in the future, if we could have a copy of this.
Yeah, we didn't realize that wasn't, and I apologize for that.
Great. So the shadow analysis that was done in our packet looks at the current site.
Right.
Okay, so on the current site, we have the time of the day, the duration, and what it actually hits, right? And it didn't mention anything about a playground, but on the new conceptual site that has yet to be adopted or even, voted on, whatever, it seems like there's a longer duration than I read in the packet on certain times of the day, as well as it hits a playground. Can you elaborate on where are we today and where we're going tomorrow, and where the shadow actually does hit?
So where we are today is the shadow hits the front quarter of the property, which is mostly grassy area and a bit of playground.
This here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And the building is in the back.
The building is about 50 feet back from the intersection.
And the new proposal would be to build a building that's larger?
So on that proposal, at the very back of the property, close, other direction slide there, where your finger is now, that is an outdoor basketball court.
Okay.
And at the corner of Folsom and 6th is the building.
Right here, where no building is today.
Where no building is today, and currently is a grassy area, entry area, and then behind it and to the left of the current building is the playground.
Okay.
So the shadow sort of diagonally crosses the property, hits the edge of the playground and the grassy area and the entryway, exactly
Okay.
where your fingers are.
Right, okay. And in the future, it's just going to hit the building, and this cafe is a standalone, like a carousel cafe, or?
Well, that is so let me just reiterate, that's a potential design. I'll turn it over to General Manager.
Commissioner Phil Ginsburg, Rec and Park. Let me give you a little bit of an overview about the project. And Jordan was correct in that this is really still in the design phase. This is a partnership with the Trust for Public Land. The goal of the project is to add program capacity at the site because of increased density in the neighborhood. And as our Prozac representatives noted, challenges with open space in the area. The cafe is a tentative element. The design is tentative, so we are doing a feasibility on the possibility of including an indoor pool in the space. The closest public pool in the South of Market area to the South of Market area is actually at Garfield, and so in partnership discussion with community members, we wanted to take a look at that. The cafe element is sort of an optional element, and it is in the design that you have. I think this design is going to move a little bit, but I think our intent. The project intent is to activate what is the southeast corner of the property with building, because right now the frontage to the building is only on 6th Street and it's set back off of Folsom. So we do, I think under any scenario, we do want to move a larger building forward to the corner of 6th and Folsom. As Jordan noted, there will be a second floor and there will be additional program space. How that program space ends up being carved up will depend on the feasibility of an aquatics element to the site.
So is there's a play structure in the current, I guess that's a playground for children. In the proposed, there isn't any?
There would probably be one, as I understand it, just hasn't been decided where.
Okay, so for the purposes of our decision today, we need to look at the current situation versus something
you
that's
do need to look at the current design that's on site now. I think that there's a little bit of qualitative analysis, at least for our commissioners, and I think we just wanted to note factually that it is likely that some of the shadow will end up falling on building on this, or a significant amount of the shadow will end up falling on structure.
So while
in the new design.
While you're speaking, if you may, so I think I asked this question before. Are there any plans to expand programming to before 9 a.m.? This was the question I asked on the last
I remember that.
building.
I rember that.
Anything changed?
Yeah, I remember that. And I wish I had actually done something about it since the last time you asked. Right now, the facility operates about close to 9 or 10 hours a day. We do have robust programming. As you know, Commissioner, we San Francisco voters just passed Proposition B, which gives us a little bit more wiggle room, and we are in the process of actually taking a look at all of our program and program hours, and it's something that I still need to get back to you about.
Okay. Are there any other current parks in District 6 that are open before 9, or?
Well, don't forget, this is a structure and not this is a rec center and not a park. So Victoria Manolo Draves, most of our parks, our operating hours are between 6 a.m. And I think either 10 p.m. or midnight, depending upon the neighborhood. So for example, Victoria Manolo Draves is open early. South Park is or will be open early. We have a number of parks that are actually within a 5-minute walk of Gene Friend Rec Center in the Tenderloin. We have 17th and Folsom, which I'm very proud will be opening in January or February, I believe.
Sure. So there are patrons that use this kind of as a park. If you have a child, they go to the playground. They might not go into the rec center. Kind of for purposes of people's programming, they could lay on the grass.
You know, it's actually possible that the new design would allow us to think differently about the operating hours. Right now, with the old design, as you know, there's a kind of a weird fenced-in structure, and having kind of the building open and eyes on the backyard, eyes on the open space has been important. But with the new design, that's something that we can certainly take a look at. Our goal is to have both our buildings and our parks open as many hours a day, as many days a week, as many weeks a year as we can possibly program.
Thank you.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. I'm highly supportive of this project. I think it's great. We've talked about the need for SROs and sort of where they fit in our market when we also have the similar discussions about larger size units. And I personally feel like this is a great project because SROs are the entryway for a lot of people into the city, and it's also great housing stock for a lot of our population. So I think it's great. It's actually funny, Commissioner Moore brought up something that I had actually been thinking about that I haven't brought up too much, but I totally agree on her comments about the ground floor. I was recently walking around my neighborhood in Mission Bay where many of the apartment buildings do have ground floors. You have blocks of buildings that all have ground floor apartments, and the shades are down on all of them. And it's in some ways no different than when we questioned the wisdom of having ground floor parking podiums where you're looking at a blank wall. It's almost the same thing. So I really think it's worthwhile to look at options around that, whether it's raising the building so that you have the front door, even if you don't have sort of an extended stoop area, you have the front door above the actual sidewalk level, or maybe if we do need to look at the variance for permitted obstructions and see if that should include some further obstructioning to have some sort of something in front of the doors of those apartments. But in order to have eyes in the street, people have to feel like they're not in a zoo, and I think that's something that we should be looking at. I will say that before you speak, Rich, because I know you got something smart to say. No, that I want to hear. Something smart, like great. The one thing I do disagree with Commissioner Moore on is whatever solution we come to, especially if it involves raising the building somewhat. I'm not, we can talk about that. I'm not interested in decreasing the number of units. I mean, we'll have to see how that plays out with the height limits and all of that, but philosophically, that's not a direction that I would want to go in. I have a couple other comments, but Rich, go for it.
Okay. So, Commissioners, in talking with the architect, it sounds like they can actually accommodate a kind of raised open area on the ground floor, kind of back to what we originally looked at. So you would see street, a kind of raised open area used for private open space, and then the unit, which was basically harkening back to an earlier scheme that we had looked at. The architect mentioned that they can basically there's additional height on the ground floor, so that way we still are within our kind of minimum tolerances for ground floor ceiling height, but still accommodating. I don't think he mentioned that we likely can't accommodate a 3-foot, but anywhere between 7 and 14 inches, so basically about 2 steps up above from the public right-of-way, so that you get a little bit of that separation from street and then open space, basically.
If I may, thank you for hearing me again. Reza Koshnevisan, SIA Consulting. At this point, we have a 7-inch step up into the building, and we have ceiling heights, varying from 8 foot 11 inches to 8 foot 8 inches. So if we were to hypothetically reduce the ceiling height to 8 foot 6, which is still rather generous, then we could raise the building by raise the ground floor by additional 12 inches without raising the height of the building. So total would be approximately 18 to 20 inches of raised stoop that we could accommodate without loss of any units.
I mean, I'd like to hear other comments on that. I mean, I think if there's any way we could, I don't want to diminish the living quality of the units. They're already smaller in size, and I do think that sort of what would be created with that private open space would actually be used by those units because they're not that big. But I mean, can we consider things like stepping up and then stepping down into the units so you're not decreasing your ceiling height? Is it more about creating other sort of physical barrier between the private space and the public space of the sidewalk with screens or awnings? Or I'm not, I'm thinking out of the box here, and that's one reason I wanted to bring it up, because I do, have reviewed our ground floor residential guidelines. I found them online, and I think that there's more we can do with that, but generally speaking, I like the project. In terms of the Gene Friend Rec Center, I think it's fantastic that we're looking at some updates to that center. It is pretty outdated, although well used. I see a lot of people playing basketball on the Folsom Street side well into the evening, so it is well used by the neighborhood. And to Commissioner Richards' question, if there's a feasibility study ongoing around a pool, that will certainly change the operating hours because pools tend to be open at like 5 o'clock in the morning. So that would certainly change a little bit of the outlook here. So still, for me, a little bit more that we can do around some certainty on how to create sort of that, a little bit of that gateway between the public space and the private space and the ground floor, but generally speaking, good project.
Commissioner Richards.
Mr. Reyes, I have one other question for you. I looked at a project recently that's going to be coming before us where they showed me pictures, this is for the ground floor issue in the alleys. They showed me pictures of homes in London where you'd step down and you'd step up, and you have a unit that's partially below grade, but it still has enough light and air.
Right.
Could you do that here, where you can get another floor?
Absolutely. I mean, we have hallways in the back of these units that initially when we had raised units designed, we were using that hallway to accommodate the ramp. So we can, raise steps up and step down and still allow for units that are accessible to people with disability. Or we just raise it by 18 inches or so. And, there's some ways that we could do it, definitely.
Okay, I'll defer to Commissioner Moore on some of the finer points of that design.
Commissioner Moore.
I'd just like to reiterate that any project, when it comes forward, has to make an attempt to be code compliant. While we have concrete construction here, where the ceiling height is shallower than using wood construction, we still have rather low ceiling heights. We all know how to do the math of an 85-foot height limit if you want to put 9 floors in there. You still have to accommodate structure. And I think in order to meet the code requirement for proper treatment on the alleys, and I don't want to make it a science out of it, except just to rely on the consistency by which we do what the department tells us to do, this will be a stretch, and I'm personally not prepared to let this required height go to 2 feet, because this should have been considered from the get-go. What then the response is in the hand of the applicant to do it skillfully, still bring forward the right number of units, but I don't personally feel that I can negotiate stepping up or stepping down, because stepping down will only exacerbate the fact that you will be even looking more into the unit. So that is just basically not going to work. I just have to ask that this project does the right research, comes forward with the right unit yield for the commercial purposes that this building comes forward, but does not try to negotiate around rules that we are only simply here to use what the planning department has very eloquently developed, at least for me, as a guidance. So I cannot do anything else to say that this project needs more study. And also to Commissioner Johnson's and to everybody's edification, this is not an SRO in the conventional way. This is basically an SRO which deals more with the crunch on tech workers who need to find a smaller unit, a well-sized unit, and again, it can be open for anybody, but its primary purpose is private development, and that's when I'm kind of saying you need to look a little bit closer if you want the unit yield. You got to meet the basic requirements of what the code asks all of us to do. And so that's my speech on this one. I cannot invent any more acceptable solution except asking that this project does the proper research in response to the challenges we have in light of the densification and also in light of the livability of units on alleys.
Commissioners, if I may, a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think as Rich pointed out, the preference is to either set the unit back at the ground level or raise it up, or both, because of the privacy issues. And I think what we've been trying to figure out here is a way to do that without losing units. So, I would ask, could you clarify, Rich or the project sponsor, on the height limit? I mean, the lower level building is at the height limit or close to it.
Yes, so the lower level buildings within the tolerances for the alley setbacks and the alley setback controls.
And I think perhaps the way to approach this would be to say, to have the commissioners consider approving the project with a couple of options or a direction to staff on kind of exactly what you'd want to see. I hear general support for the commission. Oh, the other question I have is, Well, we're at the height limit. So nothing we would do at the ground level, if it changes the form of the building in any way, would create different park shadow issues, right?
Correct. As long as it's not the larger mass, it's the smaller one.
So it's the taller part of the building that's the shadow issue, that creates the shadow, not the shorter building.
Correct.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, I don't think, I think I would ask Phil to weigh in, but I don't know that from a park standpoint that there's a direct issue, but perhaps for park users going back and forth to this by the building, it might be something that we could look at.
Yeah, I mean, we typically don't, weigh in directly on design, but I think our preference would certainly be for either a step up or setback to the extent that the units are facing what ends up being outdoor space in the park. The potential for, if there are privacy concerns, that tends to create a little bit more conflict with park users if the spaces are so close together. So, I think maybe a kind of a healthier coexistence between the residential units and outdoor play actually would be well served by that by pursuing that kind of option.
Okay, Commissioner Richards.
I guess procedural question. Understanding we're talking about now the design of the building, the tall structure will not change the shadow impact, and now we're getting into design issues. As I look at the way the schedule is, should we go ahead and vote on the shadow issue and then deal with the design issue in the commission meeting, or what should we do here?
Comment.
Entirely up to you, commissioners, at this point. If the Rec and Park Commission is prepared to move their portion of the items forward, you can continue deliberation regarding design, or you can take up the entire matter now and then take up the matter after the Rec and Park Commission adjourn.
And the Rec and Park's approval of it, though, would be on the mass proposed, and if we got into design and changed the mass, that would bring this back to another hearing, correct?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah. We need to deal with the mass.
If you're going to change it, yes.
As proposed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Moore.
Let me make a suggestion. The two buildings are engaged at the ground level. In order for the Shipley Street units to perform and be raised 3 levels, if the point where the two buildings lock is properly done, you could step up through the corridor into the annex, so into the Shipley Street annex, and that can be done in a number of ways, with steps as well with the ramp, in order for somebody who has something to carry or whatever for that grade transition to occur at that level. In response to Director Ginsburg's comment, I do believe that the alley is complemented by elevating the ground floor unit. It is already residential, older residential, smaller buildings, and now the alley completes itself as a complete alley rather than with this awkward what's going on there. And I think it will be comfortable for the people who live in the units as well as for those who are walking by. And so I think it is a win-win by considering in some form or another to do the grade change within the building. There's also a large bicycle room which could be reconfigured where that grade transition is much easier to accomplish. So there's possibilities, but we cannot design this building here together, but I would ask Mr. Terrell, the architect, to perhaps acknowledge that that is possible. Could you step up and explain that to both commissions?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an important issue, and I think something that we've given a lot of attention to. A project of this sort sometimes is cast by basically what you'll see is its primary image, the corner of the building, and it's been given a lot of attention over the last several years, much more than you can imagine, iterative over and over. But the secondary portion of this building, which is the first 4 floors of the building in terms of the organization of the commercial space, the point of entry for the overall building, and lastly, these garden units has been something that we've been back and forth with the planning department on, not in just this project, but in several projects in the past. So we've learned some lessons about just these things. And I don't disagree with anything that's been said here in terms of which solution might be best. I think something to impart more intimacy and privacy into these units is important. However, given also the size of the units and the pressure on that ground floor plate to do what it's going to do in terms of bicycle storage and amenity, we've been looking at negotiating how that can come and go. I think that the 8.5-foot floor plate that might be rendered by virtue of picking this up a few steps would be something we could do. We actually had that, the last solution that we provided before we came to commission, and that was something that we negotiated back to where we are today. So my preference would be to look at closely the existing width of that 6-foot sidewalk with the condition of the livable alley that we have, the living alley that we have that's coming, bulb outs, planting, and surfaces and the like, but look at that threshold between the 6-foot existing sidewalk, the 2.5-foot band that we have proposed now, which is still hardscape, but I think could become something of a hybrid where it's planted and provides a better threshold between the building face and the point of entry, and then develop, as we had before, a setback that is a forecourt to these entries that would serve as basically a place to take off your shoes, come into the entry. These buildings, these units rather, are rather small, so entering directly from the sidewalk experience into the unit is a little less than what we would hope at this point. So my preference would be to raise the units by a matter of 18 to 24 inches, several steps, if you will, and propose a gated entry as we had before with vertical bars of sorts that would be something elegant, that would be something complementary to the palette of materials we have now, but would render a 5 or 6 foot depth exterior to the front door and recessed on the exterior of the building. And that thereby gives both the elevation that would render some privacy and the added space to these units that I think that they could benefit from. But as I said, we've had, I think, several solutions to this end. We've tried to work closely with the intuition and the judgment of the planning staff to come up with a solution that we felt we could all bring to you for the benefit of the project.
So is it my understanding? Go ahead, sorry.
Do you still have that particular sketch with you?
I don't have it today, but we have it certainly saved on file. It was the last.
Mr. Sucre have it because he originally introduced it as being too dark. I don't have a horse in that game.
It was a concern. It was a concern about both, is it too shaded and is it safe? And that was the concern that we last shook hands on, deciding that we would bring it forward and raise it by one step and utilize the planting dimension that we had for hardscapes that might be permeable but not planted.
Commissioners, so you'll see here, this is the original version of this step where we have the unit basically over here, a small forecourt over here, and then basically the sidewalk over here. And I think it sounds like the architects can accommodate a raised entry for the stoop, the forecourt, basically over here, and especially if we reorganize where the storefront is over here and not have it centered and have it pushed, basically pushed over to the side, that we can kind of create that, public-private zone between the public right-of-way, the private open space for the units here, as well as give enough buffer between where the unit is and then where the street is.
I mean, if I may, I think the difference between what you saw before and the difference between what you just, that drawing and the potential better solution is that there wouldn't be a solid wall. It would be more transparent, but would still raise up and provide that sort of public-private zone in front of the unit.
Yeah, so like the architects can certainly look at some kind of gate to separate between the two, or some kind of screen or transition element that kind of works with the kind of overall design of the building. So.
And if I may, to respond to Mr. Gilberti's question, there is most of the roof is actually an outdoor space for residents to use.
Okay, good. Well, I'm supportive of the items that Commissioner Moore brought up, and I'm even more delighted to hear that there has been, through the study of this, at least one version that comes close to meeting that and staying within the mass of the project size. Okay, Commissioner Richards.
Just one question, Mr. Sucre. So this proposed entryway solution would look something like in the guidelines where there's a gate, there's a landing, and then there's either door recessed, or would it be at the...
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm confident that we can work with the architects to basically develop a scheme or a forecourt scheme that basically hits upon the intent of the ground floor residential design guidelines.
And that wouldn't change the massing of the building?
Correct, it would not.
Okay, so we're still good. Right. Okay.
Commissioner Johnson.
Fantastic, thank you. So I think I think you've answered my question, and we can talk in a second about what findings we should make in our motion on the large project authorization to sort of memorialize that. And I would just add in that I know that there is a potential for the landing to be dark, but you don't necessarily have to have an awning or something to provide privacy. I'm referencing sort of the newer buildings that are on King and 2nd, right across from the ballpark, and the ground floor units that are there have, they have 2 steps up, glass, 3-foot sort of gate, and then the door. There's no awning, there's no, obstruction, there's no big, huge planters. And those people see thousands of people walking by their doors going to Giants games. But I noticed that many of them do have their shades up at least halfway up on 1 or more stories. That they, so those sorts of changes really do impact the street life. So I appreciate that. Okay, do we have to take the shadow motion first?
Commissioner Moore.
I have one more comment to Mr. Sukwe. As you are kind of taking these design changes through department considerations, I would like to encourage, and that's in support of Director Ginsburg's comment, that appropriate lighting is added to these little stoop-up setbacks so that at night, when somebody in the late afternoon comes from any of our Rec and Park facilities walking through the alley, which is now eyes on the street, etc., also has a feeling, here are people at home and the lights are on and there's a proper residential feel to what is now a pretty dark, deeply recessed front door.
Agreed.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Richards.
One last question to the project sponsor in regard to the commercial space. Is it my understanding that you are providing below market rate commercial space as a part of the agreement with the community? We heard a couple of people get up and talk about this business and that business staying. And
right, yeah, we have been in negotiation with various neighborhood groups to see what we can do to help the neighborhood. And this was one of those that we said portion of the commercial space could be assigned to them. And the size of it, we haven't hashed out yet, but we told them that, yes, portion of it would be used for them.
This space from a commercial point of view is challenging because of the neighborhood? I'm trying to understand. I'm tired of walking down through new buildings. Some of them have actually been built in the year 2000 in the Mission. They're still empty, after 15 years. So, I really want you to work with the community on trying to get local businesses in there.
Sure, absolutely.
And the other thing is, as I look at the map and I look at the community room and then the storage area down on the ground floor, it seems a little counterintuitive to me that we'd have storage down. I know bike storage makes sense, but is there storage for apartment interior stuff down on the ground floor? What is that storage area? Not the bike storage area.
Well, portion of it, is, as you can see, there's circulation of the building, all the amenities that is needed for, such as, transformers, not the transformers, but the panels, the pump rooms and all that. Right. But, it's rather generous back there. I mean, this is why, we came up with this idea of having that open space, to reduce the size of the massing, size of the building, at ground floor, provide open space at grade, and provide open space at that area.
Sure. So, it's not open. So community space at the ground floor versus the 8th floor.
That's right.
Ground floor makes more sense to me because people come and go. It has access maybe to the lobby, off the lobby.
That's right. I mean, the 8th floor. First of all, we are using one. We will be using one unit. The sound rating of that floor is going to be an issue because there is 10 or 11 units there, and they have people hanging out.
Sure.
It would be an issue at that level. So that's why we are
so,
again,
So what's the logic of putting the community room on the 8th floor? Is there some view, or is there some other benefit that I'm missing? Sounds like you're losing a unit. You have to kind of soundproof it because people are going to be playing games and TV and things like that. Is there a benefit I'm missing of having it on the 8th floor?
I mean, this was through working with the planning department that we had a unit at that location.
Okay.
And
so if you took the community room and put it on the 1st floor, on the 8th floor, would it be storage?
No, it would be on the 8th floor. It would be additional units, so it would be 103 units, and it would be a unit that will have downtown views, and it would be a really livable unit.
So the storage that we're getting rid of, what does that do to the project?
absolutely nothing.
Okay. I mean, I don't know about how my fellow commissioners feel, but I know we're going to be talking about the project itself, but I strongly believe that we're losing a unit for a rec room on the 8th floor and putting storage on the 1st floor. It's not something that I would support.
Commissioners, just to weigh in a little bit here to provide some background into our conversations with the project sponsor. Typically with the SRO units, we are definitely looking for some kind of common amenity space that the residents can use given the small size of the units. It's something that we've asked from a lot of the SRO projects. In this case, given that they have that common roof deck on the top floor, we found that a kind of community room for the residents, which is what which would be used for, was complementary to that roof deck area. So the sponsor in this case was willing to kind of sacrifice a unit for this common open area. And then in terms of storage, the small size of the units lends itself well towards a need for residential storage for the dwelling units, which is something that is commonly lacking in a lot of these new developments. So it's actually good that they included storage space that could be used for the units.
So the community room has great views of the downtown. You can sit up there with your friends, and that's why and it's connected to the roof.
Precisely.
Okay. So if it's a rainy day, you can just the 8th floor, not the 9th. Okay, I understand that. Thank you.
I see no more questions by Rec and Park. Margaret, what's your advice? Commissioner Lowe, did you want to make some recommendations on the matters before us?
Yes. The shadow that is cast onto Gene Friend, we just have to evaluate the shadow as the conditions currently exist of Gene Friend. It does hit an active playground area as well as basketball court, but it is before the facility is open. And I do have some amendments to the resolution. They're non-substantive in general. It just cleans up the resolution and eliminates language that is repeated, and would like to move this matter forward for approval by the Rec and Park Commission first, based on these amendments to the resolution.
And commissioners, all of you have those resolutions, the amended resolutions in front of you.
Yeah, the red line resolutions.
So we need a second?
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded.
Commissioner Lowe?
Aye.
Commissioner Harrison?
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson?
Aye.
And Commissioner Buell?
Aye.
For the Planning Commission on that motion, as it has been amended, Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
Aye.
Commissioner Richards.
Aye.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 5-0.
And now, Rec and Park Commission, you are on item 1B, which is to adopt a resolution to recommend to the Planning Commission that the new shadow cast by the proposed project at 3456 6th Street will not have a significant adverse impact on the use of the Gene Friend Recreation Center as required by Planning Code Section 295. And I think, Commissioner Lowe, you had some amendments there also.
Thank you. Again, I made some modifications to the resolution. It is non-substantive in nature. Again, it's just to clean up language as well as to eliminate some language that's not necessary in the resolution. On that basis, I'd like to move this matter forward for the Rec and Park Commission to approve this matter based on the amendments to the resolution.
And you are finding that it does not have adverse, right?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. So we need a second.
I heard a second. It's been moved and seconded.
Commissioner Lowe?
Aye.
Commissioner Harrison?
Aye.
Commissioner Anderson?
Aye.
And Commissioner Buell?
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners. We are now adjourned.
Thank you. Well, I would love to say, though, that it's always a pleasure to have these joint meetings because, but it's frustrating because it would be fun to weigh in on all the design issues. And but we will refrain from doing that and wish you the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, we'll be here for several hours. I'm sure the Planning Commission would welcome your attendance.
We appreciate the invitation and pass.
Mr. Director, I believe we will see each other again very soon.
Planning Commissioners, we are still in session. I'm sure the Recreation and Park Commission will adjourn quietly to allow deliberations to continue on items 1C and 1D for the adoption of findings, as well as the large project authorization.
Okay, Commissioner Richards.
I move the findings for the shadow
project.
The project. So I move to approve the project with the direction to staff to have a transition point between the sidewalk, private and public space, have a step up of at least 18 inches, and a recessed entry.
Correct.
Second.
For the ground floor.
For the ground floor.
For the ground floor.
On the alleyway.
residential units On Shipley. Yep.
Yes.
Second.
No,
No,
the
second.
18 inches is incorrect. It has to be up at least two steps, that is,
Well, 2 steps will be 14 inches, but
18 inches better. We need.
so a minimum of 18.
Minimum of 18.
Minimum of 18, that's better.
Yeah, that's what he said. Second.
Two steps up.
On that motion, then, Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Koppel,
Aye.
Commissioner Moore,
Aye.
Commissioner Richards,
Aye.
and Commission President Fong.
Aye.
So moved, Commissioners. That motion passes unanimously 5-0 and concludes this special hearing.
Okay, great. So this special.
Comment?
Is there a general public comment?
Nope.
No. Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Yes.
Great. Can I go to?